hopefully this is all going to make sense. I'm going to fast track us into understanding the what we can do with the .NET API. Now this you can see what I've done here straight away is a mock-up of the OE inquiry menu based on so you can see that I'm looking at gate comming, and we're going to be looking at how that was built. And I only stuck at 3 lines because that's all I needed to do to prove the particular point in my mind, that I can add in anything that we need. You also wanted to know about how, if we were looking at a screen like the company summary screen or any other screen, we could add in controls to allow hyperlinking directly from a field rather than from the label of a field. So you'd want hyperlinking directly to data or to websites or to wherever. So we'll be looking at these two things. I could just drop in and show you the code that I've got here running inside my development environment, but what I will do is to start to build it up and to build you a story around what you'll get from the software development kit and how the software development kit can be used. When we come to it, it should be a question that you come along into the Sage CRM community. You can, and the community.sagecrm is where you'll find most of the resources. Inside the community, inside the partner community downloads section, we've got this area called the example components and developer resources. If you don't have access to this, let me know and I will make sure that everyone who needs this has full access to it. And so you should have the SDK installer here, and there are other examples of where there are example components which include pages that have been rebuilt using the .NET DLL within here. So there's a whole set of other stuff in here. Now let's assume that we have installed the SDK installer. What we get, and I'll tell you what I'll do, is I will start up another instance of Visual Studio, is that you get a set of snippets and example projects which show how to do different things. So underneath where we install this, and that's actually not where it is installed, but underneath where I've got documents, underneath Visual Studio 2017, and it doesn't matter whether you're using the Express edition, the Community edition I think they call it, and what you'll find is that there's a set of projects that are created. Page Rebuild is the one that I'm working on at the moment, and Sage People List was an example that I created some time ago. But you've got an example project called Company Summary, which is what it says. It's a rebuild of the company summary screen. Compound entry screen, which illustrates how you can create a screen for entering 2 records at the same time, which are related. And I think that's an opportunity and a company record being entered in. A quick look rebuild. The quick look screen is the one that looks like this. If I go on to the More menu and look at Quick Look, that's the quick hit. So it's a rebuild of that, showing multiple grids within a page. And then probably most importantly, in terms of the sophisticated level of coding that's involved, is the related entities rebuild. And the related entities is the actual code that is used in the shipped feature of Sage CRM, which is the relationships tab here. So this is a documented feature of Sage CRM, and we provide a version of that code within the related entities. So everything you can see in this screen and all of its behaviors, like these types of grid screens and being able to select multiple items to do work on, they're all examples within the SDK. So there's four sample projects which show how things can be done. Now, in addition to the 4 sample projects, The SDK also consists of some code snippets, and the code snippets that are relevant for the topics that we've been discussing are the JavaScript code snippets and some Visual Web Developer, or as we can see in here, HTML snippets and for around Sage CRM. The Visual Web Developer ones are essentially, they are to do with the setup of some simple JavaScripting around those pages. So it's a little simpler than we perhaps would normally think about. Inside the JavaScript environment, if we go down into JavaScript, you can see that there are code snippets again for Sage CRM, which are related to the client-side API. And the client-side API is very important here because it's going to include some of the things that we can use to achieve the behavior that we want within inside the screen, where you want to be able to change easily the hyperlinking associated with the field. You've got then, in addition to that, several snippets underneath Visual C#, and within here you'll see that there's both the .NET and the SOAP-based web services examples. The .NET is what we're interested in, and you can see there's a whole set of snippets which covering quite a range of different examples of how to do things. In addition to the snippets, then, to allow us to get going very quickly with the coding, you'll find that underneath Visual Studio as well, we will see that there are some example templates which we can then use as well. So there are some project templates for Visual C#. There's a basic entity template, and there's an entity template, and then there's also a basic template. The entity template does require the SDK to have properly installed, but the basic template, which is the one that we're going to use, or I'm going to use in my demonstration now, is fine. You can actually do a lot of the manual copying from resources that I can provide. So if I start back and think about the way in which we would work with the Visual Studio and the templates and the resources, excuse me, I can start to create a brand new project, and you'll see that underneath Visual C#, that there are the Sage CRM basic template, and then there's the entity template. And so I'm going to choose my basic template, and I'm going to write this and say that this is my example 1 project, and I'm just going to choose OK. Now what happens is that this is going to build for me a couple of pages. It's going to a couple of classes here. The base class, which contains the app factory, which is the method that would be exposed to allow the DLL to be invoked from the interface, the Sage CRM menu structures, and then we've also got the custom page class, which we can see in here. In my case, it's called example 1, and it's got an example of how to use this build contents class, which contains the code that we want to use to create the example code that we've got. It starts to introduce us as well to important ideas like the web object, because you can see there's the constructor that we're engaged in. We are constructing our page, which assembles ultimately the HTML that will be returned as a result of the HTTP request response, and this is all to do with the way in which we're then interacting with metadata and with the code that allows us to pull back data from the system. This is all sort of very simple hello world stuff, and to demonstrate that this is sort of hello world stuff, I'm going to just change off where my project properties are, so I can actually invoke this from within inside CRM to show you what it's doing. To do that, I'm just going to go and change some of my build settings, and here's the output path that I want to do, and say where I'm going to save this particular item. I want to go down into where my CRM is installed. This, by the way, you'll see underneath the path of where CRM is. Let's give you a little bit of a text pad entry here. You can see there. Oh, that's too much. That's too much. There we are. That's better. You can see there the path that we're going to. That's very obvious, but there are also paths down here into crm.net. This is where you will find the registered objects that you need to that are registered as we go through and install Sage CRM. So if you were to look underneath this folder, you would see that this is where you've actually got you will see let's get to crm.net. This is where you will find underneath here the registered objects and DLLs, but we're not doing anything underneath this location. All your work gets put underneath the name of the install, which is CRM in this case, because that's the default name of the install, and then there's a folder in there for custom.net. So it's important that any of our folders get pushed underneath custom.net, any of our DLLs that we build. So that's the destination that we're aiming to put any of our work. This is the install name. Yep. So that install name could, of course, be Banana or Fandango. It could be whatever you like. So let's call this Fandango. Fandango. There you go. To illustrate, that's where everything would then be found. And if I go ahead now, I can build this. So I'll go up into build and build my solution. I will have underneath where I had my CRM custom.net, we should see that we now have an example 1 DLL that I've just created. And if I look across into CRM as the system administrator, and I'm going to go to my company tab, and I can start to look at what I've already got in here. This is where I had my page rebuild. Illustrating this, I'm going to call this example 1. It's custom.net DLL. So you can invoke the custom.net DLLs from menu items, from buttons. You can invoke it from hyperlinks in grids. You can invoke them from custom buttons that have been added using the client-side API. You can call them from ASP pages. You can also, in turn, call them from within inside other .NET DLLs, and those .NET DLLs in turn can call back into CRM and basically communicate all the way through. So you can mix and match the DLLs with calls back into the main CRM interface, as well as calling ASP pages if you need to create a hybrid environment as you're moving forward. If you don't get everything done within the first phase of the project, you could scope it so we're going to replace this part with this part with this part and create a hybridization of that. Anyway, this is example 1 is the name of my project, and that method name that I have to use here is the name that is referenced inside the base environment, which has got my app factory, and you can see there is my run custom page, and that's being passed in the web object that we're dealing with, the web class, which has to be, if you imagine its communication is that we are going to create something hanging off a menu like this, like page rebuild is here, that when we click on it, and we can see within the URL that's passed, it goes first of all into the eWare DLL, but it knows that it's been redirecting its behavior off to that eWare DLL. So it passes everything to the DLL for it to process to then hand back the HTML for this page. So it's very tightly integrated. This is one of the reasons why you can't mix and match, for example, the any of the ASPX or ASP.NET visual classes, because Sage CRM wants to manage completely the transaction, the web transaction. You can use other non-visual classes, so you can use inside your projects, as you can see here, system classes, for example. You can interact with anything that allows you to interact with the file system, or you can run some of the data-only classes if you're wanting to, but the visual aspects and the management of the web transaction has to come through the eWare DLL. So this is our page. We are defining this connection through to the run custom page, and I can add that in, and I can choose save. And now my user over here, if they, and you can see I'm using Susan May at the top, if I refresh her screen, right next to my rebuild, there should be an example one. And if I click on example one, we'll get the hello world text being written out. Now, what you'll notice about this page is that we have got straight away the correct menu structure at the top and the contextual information about where this has been used. Yet if we look at our code that we've written, and this is the custom page, this is automatically being used, you can see that all that we've got is a series of add contents, but we've also got this get tabs at the top. So the get tabs method is getting the menu structures for this page. It's building it all correctly for the current context that we want here. Now, if I strip out all this stuff and just end up with nothing, maybe actually say add content, add content, and just have in here, and you can see that as I'm typing this, you can see that this is coming from the web class. The web class is this parental class set that is this generic class provided by the API to allow us to construct pages. Most of the sample projects that we use make use of the generic web class, but there are other classes called the specialized classes, which make for building pages which are quite complex very easy. I'll show you this in a moment, but if I just say in here hello world, we can see just what this on its own is doing. And so if I now save this and then rebuild this, so I've just sent that across. I've used some hotkeys there to send it across, and if I redraw my page, you can see that I've lost the menu structures, but it is clever enough to know that I'm in a particular context, and so it has drawn the top content as well. There are some overrides as well, so if I don't want that, I can put an override to stop building out the top content as well. So there are methods that allow me to do that. But really, in most of the integration environments, I think you wouldn't want to be overriding the context of the account or the person that you're in. You would want that by default. And here you can see that I've added the get tabs back in. Now I can continue with other things. Well, one of the things I want to show is that I can add information into the screen in any way that I like. So I've got messaging mechanisms that I can use. So I can write out in here, this is a friendly message in here, and I can add in an error message here, and I can say this is a scary message. And you'll notice that I've written my error after my info message, and I could now save that and rebuild. And so if I switch over in here and refresh my page, what we will find is that scary messages know where they should go, and they're always written out into the correct location. And friendly messages always know where they should go, and so they're written out into the nice space as well. And what we'll find is that, say, the classes know where they should be drawn onto the screen. So if I ever get to the point where I want to add a button, so if I'm not just adding in if I'm not just adding in text or HTML in to build my page, here you can see I'm adding a URL button, and my URL button here contain, what should I call it? Let's call this new new.gif. That, by the way, that's new.gif thing is not so important because within the contemporary theme, they're invisible. We don't represent buttons now as images anymore. We represent them as flat text boxes that can be clicked on, flat text buttons, and you'll see that, but it's all going to be styled correctly for the ergonomic theme that we're using. And if I put in a URL, here I can put in a URL that can call back to a page. Now, bear in mind that I'm in the context of the company. Imagine I want to go onto the opportunities list. If I want to go onto an opportunities list, let's just remind myself of what this is from a system administrator point of view. If I go onto the opportunities list, I would be calling the action code 184. So I could be on my rebuild of a page and I want to jump across into a core CRM page, which is displaying my opportunities. So could be on here, but I want to click on something and go back to opportunities list. So that's action code 184. So I can put in here now a URL, and so in here I can put in, let's put in URL, and in here in a string I can put in 184. I can close this off as my line. So I've now added a button. So if I save that and then rebuild it and refresh this page, you can see that I've got a new button in here. And that new button, though, and by the way, because I've used the correct translations, it's picked up the correct, because I used the correct caption code in here, which matched an existing button with the correct name. So that's why it's translated and added in the nice effect that we've got here of the underline new. And if I click on new here, you can see it jumps across onto the opportunities page. So this is what I'm showing you, that you can build pages which move backwards and forwards between the two. And if I now move the back arrow, we can see that we've come back into this context. Well, I've shown you there the basic outline of how to get going with a Hello World. And if we want to go a little bit further, what you can do on the community is you can go to the e-learning area, and within the developer part of this, you can come down into developer and run down, and you'll find lessons 17 and 18. 17 and 18 are about the .NET API. Now these are aimed at, and you can see that they've got for 7.3 SP2. It's the same .NET API. It's not changed. Some of the UI elements may have changed, but in terms of everything within it, it's still good. It's still fine. You don't need to worry about that. And if you want the slide decks for that, then again you've got lessons 17 and 18 within slide decks that remind you about everything that you need. So I've shown you there how simple it is to get going. If I show you something else, which is another project, so I want to I want to show you how projects evolve. I am going to open up now one of the existing projects, which is the Quick Look project. And this is going to illustrate how there are classes being used for particular data purposes. And the reason why I want to do this is that in the example, it had the presence of a grid. Now, I didn't know whether this was a grid being drawn from an underlying data source or a grid that was a manually constructed grid. So if it's coming from an underlying data source, this example is a very good use of one, because this shows how a set of grids can be incorporated within one page. Now, to put this into sort of context, if I go as a system administrator and install a component, one of the new components for Sage CRM 2018, I want to use a nice example of a rebuild for the company Quick Look page. So I'm going to install this component, and this is, by the way, just demonstrating that we've got code examples which show how you then can deliver in updates of particular DLLs into a customer's install. So you can install a component this way. This is a set of DLLs that might be needing to be dropped in. This is also showing you that like ASP pages, they can be hot dropped into an install. You don't need to stop everything. They can be delivered in to a server. You shouldn't have anybody in the system while you do it, but it does mean that you can. It's not a complex thing to be able to drop in a DLL. And now on this page, if I'm looking at my company page, there should be a new tab called New Quick Look. If we look at this, there we are, New Quick Look. And if I run this, this is calling again an example of a DLL called Quick Look with the function run Quick Look being invoked. And so you can see its behavior, how these three grids are being built. And if we look at this, we can see that it's a fairly neat way of showing you the things that can be included within the page. So the get tabs we know about, that's needed to make sure that the contextual information is correctly displayed, certainly on the menu structures. The add content with the HTML form is to make sure that it's correctly wrapping things within a form structure, and then we've got a number of structures in here being created. Now, this idea of the list structure is retrieving it from metadata. So these are all defined structures within Sage CRM's metadata. We're able to change properties, including how lists are filtered using the idea of context. And you can see here that we've got mechanisms to allow us to get hold of different contexts. And if we're thinking about our own code in the future, wondering about context, well, here inside the snippets that we've got, so if you look inside snippets within the My Code snippets and the Sage CRM.net snippets, you can see that there are lots of information around how to use these, including context of the current user, the preferences for the current user as well, and the idea of get context information to allow us to be able to retrieve information about the company or the account with which we are working. So you've got all of the ability to get hold of contextual information to allow us to build the screen correctly. Anyway, this example is showing us the fact that we've got a communication list, an opportunity list being built, and a case list being built. And then it's showing us how the page comes together in the sense that we've got these objects. If we're handling and ultimately handling data that we want to be returned as HTML, we have to have some sort of user interface control. And here you can see that we've got a class library called the Use UI class library, which contains these things called the vertical panel. Now, Robin, if I'm relating it into experience of ASP pages, this is where we would think about we're thinking of a container block. So vertical panels and horizontal panels are types of containers that we can then bring our classes that we've instantiated, like the com list, the opera list, into that particular panel, and we can then have that all essentially executed. And you can see this to HTML returns the object, which is essentially only in potential a data object, to execute itself as HTML into the code. And you can see that what I've done here within that vertical panel is added all of those different classes and then added a series of other buttons. And since it's all within the context of our build contents, it knows, once everything is inside this page, how to then draw it. And that results in the page that we can see here. The aim of the APIs is always to get the metadata to do the heavy lifting. So something like communication list you can see here, or opportunity list, this is something that the system administrator, so if we look here, we've got in our opportunity list company name and person, for example, arranged in that order, company name then person within the list. If I go in as the system administrator into the customization area, into the opportunity, I find my opportunity list. So there's my opportunity list, and what I can do is, if I want to change this as my user, I can just change the order. So person is now in front of company name. I can update everything. And then I can choose save. And so if I refresh this screen again, watch what happens to the company and person name. So the person and company name have swapped over. I could have added other columns into there, or I could have removed them. And it's entirely under the control of the system administrator, just like every other screen within Sage CRM is under the control of the system administrator. Okay, so that's where we've gone in and we've seen, using the examples of the shipped projects, some of the ideas behind metadata doing the heavy lifting and how the screens can be built up. Now, of course, we want to get to the point where we're looking like one of the screens that you've got, the existing screens that you've got, and that wasn't based on metadata. If I look at my page rebuild, we can see in here, and I've incorporated an image, I've incorporated columns, and I've incorporated hyperlinks within the column. This actually hyperlink is not going to do much more than simply call back this page and refresh this page, but it can do whatever we want it to do, and you can see that I can add in hyperlinks to do strange things as well. So you can see I'm jumped across for whatever reason I wanted to. I've jumped from where I was maintaining the page build into editing phone numbers as well. So you can see that I can do whatever I like in this context as well. You can see I can add in messages into the screen and mix it up in the way that I want. Let's look at what we've got in here, and this is the project page rebuild project. This required me to match what an existing page looked like. So I used as a model that you'd want something that looked a little bit like the notes page. Yep. And so what I did was I mixed it so it looks like the notes page. So if I add in a note in here, test note, and choose save, you've got information about the number of whatever it is that you're looking at, and you might want to put a label in it as well. In my case, then in this page rebuild, I've aimed to produce a grid which I might want to put in additional information into, or I might want to put in this. So it's adapted. I used, though, that first example just to explore what we can do. And let's explain how I did it. Well, basically what I did was I looked at a page and I went, how's that built? So I went and I inspected the element and I viewed the source. I just went and looked at the HTML that was associated with building the page. Because this is not based on metadata, this page rebuild, it's something that I have to manually construct myself. So you can see how I'm setting up the code, and you can see there that's why my message can go here. So this is Jeff's custom message in here, and of course I can save that, rebuild, and then Jeff's custom message goes in here. And if you want that OE inquiry menu, the OE inquiry is going to be included in the code that we've got as well. So if we're looking at our alignment for that inside our page. Messages down here, we've got the different columns that we're using. So menu, selection, description. That was the exact example that I was given, and I've interpreted it slightly differently in that I added a third column, or rather a first column, which would contain any image that I wanted to show. And I've done this, and you can see in here, by adding an image where I'm using some environmental contextual information to allow me to get hold of the icon that I want to be able to show. So that's this small order in here. And then I've got the all orders, etc. And you can see that I've used the ability to construct a hyperlink. What this is doing is it's hyperlinking back into where I want to go. If I comment that out, paste this in and change this, so I could go to HTTP Sage. Let's go to community.sagecrm.com. It can go to wherever you want it to go. So it can go, of course, into your own screens, into the web portal that you're using. Control save, Control build, and I redraw my page. And now if I click on all orders, that should take me off to look at the community, which it does. So building the URLs that we want, very easy. You can see that if I go and reinstate this earlier line, all it's going to do is going to construct the correct contextual information that we want. So if I send that across and refresh this, and I now look at this and do a right mouse click and copy the link address, what you'll see that is that we've got complete access to the contextual information that we need. So you can see, and maybe we need to do another lesson if you're not entirely sure on how context is read and understood, but this is telling me that the dominant context is the company. The company ID that we're looking at is 28, which is Gatecom in my example, and key 2 tells me the person, which is Simon Yaltoy. So this is all telling us where and how things should be built, and if I wanted to within my code now add in additional hyperlinking behavior into here, then I could do that as well. And it's just a question of then building in the rows that we want and making sure that the table is finished off as it is. I think that what I've done is I've shown you so far the options that I set out to show you.